All right, welcome back. Let's cover some of the physical geography of North America. And first thing I want to highlight is some of the major climate types in North America. We have cold up at the top. In the southeast, it's quite warm and wet here in the southeast United States. We have a dry region or a B climate in the interior west in Nevada and Arizona. And then we have wet or what's called a Mediterranean climate here in California, which is a combination of wet in the winter and dry in the summer. These also are associated with some major vegetation types. We have in the cold zone of northern Canada, we have what's called the boreal forest, which is a cold, wet forest that dominates much of northern Canada. We have an open grassland in the middle of the US called the Great Plains, and then east of there it's quite wet, and west of here in the interior it's quite dry. This is an image showing the boreal forest in northern Canada. So this is a large contiguous forest zone dominated by what are called conifer trees. They kind of look like Christmas trees, but they go on and on and on. It's cold and wet, and many places very swampy. The boreal forest is one of two large forest zones in the world, one being the taiga in northern Russia, which we'll talk about in the future, and then the second one being the one we're covering now, the boreal forest of North America. This is a map showing the distribution of Mediterranean climates and biomes or vegetation zones, and we have one here in California. There's a little hole here where the Central Valley is because we're a little bit drier than most Mediterranean climates, but we still experience a very similar climate here. We have the Mediterranean Sea here in Europe. We have southern Australia and southern Africa. And then also the middle part of Chile. And soon we'll be talking to California. But the thing about the Mediterranean climate is this is a dry summer climate. So let's talk about this interior desert for a moment and why that is. So we have a wet zone along the coast of California, but soon after it becomes very dry and we have a desert. This is caused primarily because of the presence of mountain ranges, especially the Sierra Nevada. The Sierra Nevada creates what's called a rain shadow, meaning that as air moves up a mountain range, you have a wet side, but as air moves beyond and down the other side, it creates a dry zone called a rain shadow. This is called the rain shadow effect. And if we look at a model of the California area, we can see we have prevailing winds that come from the Pacific Ocean. We have a very wet zone along the coast. We have a little bit of a rain shadow here in the Central Valley. And then we have the winds going up the Sierra Nevada. Usually if we look at the mountains from school, we can see some clouds forming along the mountains. But as you go to the other side, it's very dry because this is the rain shadow of the Sierra Nevada. And that's what causes that interior desert. If you've ever driven to Las Vegas or been somewhere in Nevada, you can see some of that. This is a map showing the amount of rainfall in the United States. So while we have intense rainfall along much of the West Coast, as you get into the interior, these colors show a very dry zone. And then by the time you get to the East Coast, it gets very wet again because it's affected by weather from the Caribbean and the Atlantic Ocean. This is showing land use or the type of way that food is grown. And one thing I want to highlight is that in this interior desert, mostly grazing is taking place. So cattle grazing and sheep grazing, because it's a little too dry to grow much of other types of crops. Here we have other crops that are grown in California and in the Midwest. If we look at the population figure, which we've seen earlier, one thing you might notice is that you have a more kind of densely populated East Coast area, or at least more spread out. And then it's a little bit more barren in the interior of the West, that you have these concentrations of cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix and Salt Lake City with a lot of empty space in between. This image showing the lights at night in the United States really highlights this pattern where you see a lot of settlement patterns in the east where it's wetter and flatter, But in the dry interior West, there's a lot more space in between the different settlements. Another place you could see this is the amount of land that the government owns. In the interior West, most of the land is owned by the federal government in one form or the other, because not many people bought the land to settle and farm in because it was so dry. Now let's talk for a moment about natural resources in North America. And there's a whole lot of natural resources in North America. Both states are quite rich in oil and gas and things, and precious metals. But two things I'm going to highlight are water and oil. So first, let's talk about water. One of the major natural resources of North America, this is highlighted in some of the videos you should have seen already too, are water resources, including aquifers. Aquifers are places that you can drill a well into. These are geologic formations of sand and other types of soil and rock that are capable of storing water. Water can flow through an aquifer, and water can be stored in it. This is some of the major aquifers of the United States, including the Central Valley Aquifer where we live. The colors are only to distinguish one from the other, but these are some of the places that have major water resources in the United States. A second natural resources that the United States is rich in is oil and gas. And recently, the United States has become a major producer of oil and gas. This has been primarily through the use of technology, or fracking, or hydraulic fracturing. This is a technology that allows, instead of just drilling a simple oil well, is drilled horizontally into rock. And so rock that doesn't normally have loose oil can be fractured, and then oil is extracted from that rock to produce more oil than you would normally. Canada is also a major oil producer, not as big as the United States, what are called tar sands. Tar sands are these oily deposits that can be processed in a special way to extract oil from them. This is showing a figure from the book showing the boreal forest in northern Canada, and this place in red is a primary location where tar sands are extracted from.